cross this one off. We had that in the last video. If we look at number 5, it said find sine theta over 2. I'm going to replace the a with theta. So if we're trying to find sine of theta over 2, we know that that formula is plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cos of theta all over 2. We have to decide, do we want to use plus or minus? That can be a little tricky. Now, even though we say quadrant 2, theta's in quadrant 2, right? So when we say theta is in quadrant 2, so theta is in quadrant 2, right? So theta is in between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. So when somebody says theta over 2, right, if you're trying to decide where theta over 2 lies, we would have to divide 180 by 2, which would get us 90. And we would have to divide 90 by 2, which would get us 45. So theta over 2 lies between 45 and 90 degrees. And that's in first quadrant. And sine is positive in first quadrant. So we would go with positive for this one. Now it's much easier if we're doing a theta over 2 problem, right? Like tan of 112.5, something like that. And we then turn to some value over 2, right? And then it's easier to figure out where plus or minus is, because you just look at the original problem. You say, where is 112 degrees? Well, 112 is in second quadrant, so you would say, okay, the tangent needs to be negative, or the sine is positive, etc. But when it just says, here, look at the triangle, is theta over 2 positive or negative, you need to look at the original problem, the original triangle. The original triangle is in quadrant 2. So you say to yourself, okay, if the original triangle is in quadrant 2, your triangle is between 90 and 180. Now, if I'm trying to find theta over 2, and it says plus or minus, I have to divide the original quadrant values, angles, in half. And then it tells you theta over 2 is between 45 and 90. So we're looking in first quadrant for theta over 2. And then the sign should be positive. So you want to determine in the beginning, is my sign going to be positive or negative? We're going to draw our triangle. So if it's SOHCAHTOA, we know cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So here we would have the adjacent. Here we have the hypotenuse. And our original problem says draw a triangle in the second quadrant. Our theta is here. So our adjacent is right here. It's a 1. I'll fill in the negative later. My hypotenuse is a 4. To the left is negative, so I need to make that a negative 1. When we do our Pythagorean theorem, we'll find that this side is square root 15. So let's fill in. So we have positive square root of 1 minus the cosine of theta adjacent over hypotenuse is actually already given. It's negative 1/4. Then we'll divide all of that by 2. Be careful with that double negative. Make sure you're writing 1 minus the cos theta, right? So then you'll have double negative will turn positive. We can replace 1 with 4 over 4. So in our numerator, we'd have 4 plus 1, or 5/4. In our denominator, we have a 2. Let's simplify. So we have, underneath that radical, we have 5/4 divided by 2, or multiplied by the reciprocal, which is 1/2. So then we would get 5/8. This is under the radical, and we know it's a positive answer. So we'll break apart into two pieces. So we'll have square root of 5 over square root of 8. We know that square root of 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. So it's the same as 2 square root 2. Now we have to rationalize, so we have to multiply by root 2 over root 2. So on top, we would have underneath the radical 2 times 5 over square root 10. Can't simplify that. In the denominator, we would have 2 times the square root of 2 times 2, or 4. So on top, we would have square root of 10 over 2 times, there was a 2 in front, and square root of 4 is 2. So we then get square root of 10 over 4. And that's our final answer. Now, if two things, if someone said, what quadrant is theta over 2? Well, I just told you what we need to do. You look at your original problem. In your original problem, theta is between 90 and 180 if it's in quadrant 2. And then if you're finding theta over 2, you just divide those values in half, and you get between theta over 2 is between 45 and 90, and 45, 90 is in quadrant 1. So theta over 2 is in quadrant 1. If somebody says, find the cosecant of theta over 2. Well, you work with the sine, right? Because cosecant's the reciprocal. And once you get down to get your answer for sine, you then just flip, right? So I would rewrite this as 4 over root 10. I would have to multiply by root 10 over root 10. And then I would get 4 root 10 over 10. And I could divide the 4 by 2 and get 2, the 10 by 2 and get 5. So if someone said, what's the cosecant of theta over 2? You work with the reciprocal, you work with sine of theta over 2 because we have a formula for that. Then you flip that answer. And that answer for cosecant of theta over 2 would be 2 root 10 over 5.